You may well recall, an increasingly long number of years ago now, Amazon announced they were getting into gaming. They set up lots of different mini studios and cells to produce different projects. One of them was called New World, an MMO, which naturally captured my attention. I've done several videos on it in the past, very sporadically, where there's been something of a good update. Well, I think that this month would definitely qualify. So today I want to talk about the current state of things with New World. And it seems to have really taken a turn for the worse, maybe? It is still very much a game I'm interested in playing, and is looking as popular as ever. Mid-December last year, they released this new trailer you're looking at in the background. Got something like 7 million views. That's triggered the YouTube bandwagon the past few months. Here I am, after it's over. But something just happened that really might suck. Certainly the subreddit is throwing a hell of a fit, and people are pretty disgruntled. So let's talk about the little situation that they find themselves in. For those totally out of the loop, despite the general cynicism I think many of us feel towards new MMOs now, New World did have a genuinely interesting idea, an intriguing setting that hadn't been really taken up by other MMOs, and a brilliant sandboxy gameplay premise. You can feel free to pause my video here at any point as I browse the website or look at the trailers to really get a sense of what's going on, or just use the link in the description. I think for most people, and I'm definitely included in this category, we're excited, or continue to be excited about New World, because it's coming from Amazon, this powerhouse company that we imagine has infinite money to throw at a project. And MMOs cost so much time and talent and money that obviously if anyone was going to do a good one, maybe Amazon would. There was also a bit of confusion in the early days that some of the Guild Wars 2 developers had come over to this team. That didn't end up being true. But let's be clear and keep our expectations in check. New World doesn't necessarily have the force of all of Amazon. In fact, if you read some interviews from 2014, there were suggestions that Amazon was more interested in smaller teams, like of 30 men, for 18-month projects or so, making basically small games and numerous different amounts that were creative in some way. A vast number of those projects, I assume, we've never really heard much about. I still think it's only the 3, right? One of which has been cancelled. That was the ball game Breakaway. Nonetheless, despite these initial ideas in 2014, things do seem to have changed a bit. Obviously, this is an MMO. It's much more ambitious than 30 people for 18 months, and obviously all that time has already passed. And the studio producing New World seems fairly bigger. A largely recent image showed at least 100 employees. I don't know whether that's all devs or support staff and everything like that too, but maybe some new hires would lead it going over that. There were some layoffs last year, funny enough, in summer. I missed this. About 50 people were let go and reshuffled around, but how much this really affected New World, I don't know. I think that we're looking at a pretty good mid-sized studio that can make a pretty good MMO that, as long as it's really solid, can snowball into something great afterwards, and for those reasons I still think it's worth looking at. I'll also note, for the fun of it, there is a bit of a conspiracy theory going around that New World isn't getting the support it needs because Amazon's more interested in all of its new Lord of the Rings stuff going on, which of course is also going to have an MMO from Amazon, but I don't know how much I really buy into that yet. So, what's really important to know about New World, and really brings me to the subject of the video today, is how it was an increasingly PvP-centric game. It was really about players fighting other players and the danger of players being friend or foe, adding a certain tension to the gameplay, the world, and the experience that the devs were really enjoying. And I guess they looked at popular MMOs from the more traditional MMO days. The World of Warcraft Classic re-release really taught me a lot about this, where the threat of opposing factions that might jump you as you go on about your day really adds a certain quality many contemporary MMOs don't tap into. Obviously, that's not everyone's cup of tea, and I'll come back to that in a second, but it was their vision. I have some quotes here. Early on, they said, "The spine of the game is player versus player combat. You will probably be murdered in New World." Who remembers me talking about that on the previous video? They also, some more recent quotes, say, "We believe that New World is a PvP game at its heart." And another one, that they'd been influenced by several games in the survival crafting genre. Again, basically PvP experiences. So you were looking at games like that on just a really big and really interesting scale. Like I say, that would turn some people off. I will openly admit that I personally did lose enthusiasm for the game at the same time too. I respected very much what it was going for. For the Guild Wars 2 fans watching me, it's basically sounding to me like an entire game dedicated to world versus world. And it could be something I very much enjoy. I definitely don't shy away from competitive experiences, and I don't shy away from necessarily casual ones either. But I guess my disappointment stemmed from the fact that this wasn't going to be that ultimate fantasy MMO smash experience for the 2020s that I was really hoping it would be when I first heard, wow, Amazon's making an MMO. Instead, this was by a more moderately sized, realistically sized team going for something more niche. And that was fine. The game could have been good, and it would build its audience and go along its way. But now things have kind of taken a turn. The first important thing of note is that alpha has now happened, and I deliberately opted not to play the alpha. I assumed that alpha wouldn't be too far away from real release, and I didn't want to spoil my impressions of the title with early access stuff. I didn't want to too greedily go into everything that this game was going to become, get too many expectations that would end up unfulfilled, and then ultimately end up disappointed, especially if it all ended up kind of bad. So I didn't play the alpha while many people did. It was supposed to be kind of a closed alpha, but really, the number of people I know who played it is staggering. And it strikes me that a decent chunk of the players who experienced that alpha really enjoyed and really got invested in this PvP-oriented vision of the game. That's what they really got to grips with, and it was those players who were reinforced by how much fun they'd had that became the predominant voices in discussion formats for the game. To any casual observer, it would have looked like the game was brilliant and everyone was completely on board with the PvP side of things. But what had actually happened with alpha, it strikes me, is that a decent chunk of other players had become immediately disinterested in the game and weren't enjoying the PvP, and had offered feedback that they were expecting a lot more PvE elements and hadn't sunk as much playtime. These voices really weren't around in the public spaces because they thought, well, this game's not that cool, and they didn't post very much anymore, which is also pretty natural. This is a really dicey problem for PvP-oriented experiences, because there is always that yin and yang of the player that's able to get in the powerful faction or get the gear and being a superior position, gets to have a lot of fun, comfortably killing people and only daring on rare occasions, while people who are a little bit less enthusiastic, a little bit later to the game, have the exact reverse, where the majority of the time is them really struggling and not having so much fun. I didn't play the alpha, so I don't know this for sure, but I would suggest it's pretty likely that as a game in alpha, it hadn't worked this balance out very well, and a lot of the supporting systems to smooth this kind of stuff weren't implemented as well as they could have been, and some people had really negative experiences. I know this for a fact. I've had 4 separate friends who have individually messaged me that they didn't enjoy New World because they felt like they couldn't get anything done. These people equally would have left feedback, but probably wouldn't have paraded their misgivings and been Debbie Downers on the forums. So I think what happened next was New World entered a new phase where the incumbent active community seemed very on board and happy and thrilled with the PvP-oriented stuff, and totally therefore assumed it would be full steam ahead, while the studio had entered a phase of making hard decisions about maybe changing the format of the game and what they've always been describing as the spine of the game. That brings us to about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3, when the devs put up a new developer video interview talking about PvP. Like, the video is titled, "Hey, let's talk about PvP." And in this video, they're suddenly expressing these radical design shifts that people weren't expecting. Hell, the start of the video is them just talking about PvE for a long time. In it, they almost casually introduce several sweeping changes to PvP and alter the spine of the game. They point out, most predominantly, that you now need to opt in to PvP. There are 2 forms of PvP in the game. I can't say I've fully wrestled with them. One's more faction-oriented, I believe. But you have to opt in to actually have that tension they'd always been talking about. If you don't opt in, it's not a part of the game anymore. Rather than this being interviews celebrating PvP and what should have been the game's strongest asset, it seemed so far, instead, they were really just pandering to people who liked the idea of PvE and trying to reassure them that, yes, this game would work for them too, and the game was no longer going to satisfy that specific niche it had initially been angling for. Now, I'm sure some of you are a little excited about that, and I'll come back to you in a second. But for the audience that had already bought into what New World was, the people ultimately most likely to click this video early and rate it and judge it, really hated it. And obviously so, because it wasn't what they had been expecting for, what, 2 years now? It wasn't a continuation of what they'd fallen in love with during the alphas several months ago. So the video was dislike bombed, the Reddit turned very sour, people really kicked up a stink, and now, even a couple of weeks after that video, browsing the subreddit today, for example, is still filled with people basically saying that they don't think the game's worth looking at whatsoever anymore. That's not a good position for a community-oriented product like an MMO to be in before it's even hit closed beta. So it is a bit of one of those 50-50 situations, I feel, from a more impartial outside position. I do see what the devs are trying to do. I don't particularly care if it's corporate bearing down on them, telling them they need to get a bigger demographic so they'll get more money. As long as the game at the end is good, I really don't mind too much. But this has clearly not been handled well, and I do think there could be problems. Back to you guys who that video was trying to aim at, who wanted more PvE. The game is coming out soon, so they have kind of a new vision that's contrary to what they've been doing for years. How well are they really going to implement that? For example, when they talk about rewards and incentive for doing PvP, most of their information is hazy or outright contradictory, like they haven't quite worked out where the real rewards are. In a couple of attempts to stoke the fires, shall we say, I have seen some messages from the studio where they say, oh, we're open to feedback as to how far we push the PvE stuff, we're open to feedback as to how we do these rewards. I don't think it's right that they're looking for feedback on this stuff. I think they need to be clear on what they want the balance of this to be in the game so that people know what to expect. This isn't some minor thing you can tweak based on player experiences. This is top-down vision for your product. And let's go back to this idea that release is coming soon. Even if they figured their vision out, and they've decided, let's say, that there is going to be enough PvE that your average World of Warcraft player will look at this game. How long do they have to make that? There have been reports that in the alpha, there was almost no PvE in the game, and closed beta starts in April 2020, like a couple of months from now. I don't know when release will come after that. Is it going to have to be pushed back a long time? These all really, really sour people's enthusiasms, and it's really depressing to see, honestly, because I want this genre to have things I'm really looking forward to coming out. So, that's about the situation as it stands. Like I say, they are in a pretty big news cycle right now, what with the closed beta coming out. There's another post coming out soon. I feel like I want to inform myself more about the game. As I do so, I might make more videos about it. So you guys can fill me in on these gaps. Anything you think I've been particularly deficient about in this video, let me know and we'll see how it goes forward. It is, funnily enough, still a game on my list of excitements. Mostly because I don't put much stock into the general community consensus that they have there. If loads of people are being salty about the game, that doesn't necessarily mean the game itself will be unenjoyable. And I'm still interested in it, if anything, just to see how this all works out, and the fact I've followed it for so long now. Does that make me a bit of an idiot? I guess we'll see. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Let me know what I may have missed out on, and if things continue to capture my attention, you can expect more videos about this MMO going forward. I've been here since the start, after all. See you next time.